Good morning, good afternoon, good whatever, everyone. Look, I'm sorry I'm not there. I think we all are. It's been going on for so long, and I don't want to make a habit of doing this. So I promise, as soon as they let me on planes, I'll be there and I'll be with you. But no, this is another of these virtuals. Increasingly, though, as we sort of sit here and contemplate the industry, because in the absence of face-to-face and talking about new things to do, we get more introspective. Some of these topics, I think, get really important. And one I wanted to talk about today is one of these topics that underpin what we thought was so good about the internet. You know, the issue was it's open. Now, open is a really big word. It means lots of things all the time to all kinds of people. If you talked to some kinds of regulators and you talked about the openness of a service, you might come up with this definition, which is actually one that was used in Europe by the European Regulatory Forum, mouthful, BEREC. You know, can users access this service no matter what machine they're using, no matter what form of access they're using? Is the service universally accessible? And it's bizarre to put that question in the context of the DNS, because that was the point of the DNS. It was actually engineered to deliver the same answer to the same query, irrespective of how you actually formed that query. You know, what machine, what platform, what operating system, what software, didn't matter. The DNS was not built to give different answers depending on who you are, where you are, what software you're using. That wasn't the point. The point was everyone got the same answer. It's the same result. That name has the same binding in the DNS, irrespective of who's asking. So, you know, if access to the service is the real underpinning question about whether the DNS is open, you know, the answer is yes, and I'll just stop now. But, you know, it's not yes. We don't all see the same DNS. We really, really don't. Because it's not fully open, fully uniform, fully accessible. You actually look at what names can I resolve that you can't? Or what names can you resolve that I can't? And of course, depending on where you are to pose that question, you will get very different answers. We all know about China and its efforts to resolve Facebook.com. In the United Kingdom, America, Australia, all these and most other countries have various forms of DNS-based name blocking for all kinds of motives, whether it's for content, whether it's to protect you from financial fraud or crime or whatever. So all of us do it all of the time. We don't all see the same DNS. Now, it's not always from sort of governments and national regulators. Sometimes ISPs just want money, you know. Who can blame them? And one of the most delightful ways of trying to monetize the DNS, because I can't charge for queries or answers, is to actually substitute answers. So if you ask for Jeff's favorite, you know, pizzashop.com, it'll go NX domain. That name doesn't exist. But an enterprising ISP from time to time comes up with, hang on a second, what if I send you back an IP address, which is the IP address of my favorite search engine? And my favorite search engine will actually pay me money to do this. So I can monetize the DNS by substituting answers when the name doesn't exist. I can push the search function into the DNS for money. So again, different answers for different people as a result. And there is an issue around threat mitigation where the name itself isn't resolved because it's a feature. Something like Quad 9's effort to actually stop you going to sites where we know there's malware. And again, this becomes an issue with parental controls and so on. So selectively answering in the DNS and not answering every query has become a feature, not a bug. Now, is it a problem? Not really. Most of us think that threat mitigation is a fine thing. And, you know, nation states, since the Pact of Westphalia in 1648, do have a sovereign right to do certain things that, you know, that's the rules. And it's a problem, however, when it's a lever in a different fight. When the intellectual property right interests start blocking some of these sites that actually do pirated videos, etc., And all of a sudden, there are folk who want to get there anyway, and there are folk who want to block, and it becomes an escalating problem. But in the grand scale of things, not really a big issue. So let's go back to the original question about open. We might not mean open as a service, but open as a system. For those of you who are like me, old enough to remember the rise and fall of OSI, the Open Systems Interconnect, open was being used at the time to contrast against vendor proprietary systems. It was kind of, this is closed because unless you're me, IBM, whatever, you can't do this, versus open. Here's the spec, here's even the source sometimes. Yeah, you can build your own version, that's okay. So is the DNS open in that sense? And the answer again, emphatically, God, yes, it is so open. It's openly specified, no IPR encumbrance, nothing. It's actually available as open source if you look around. There's so many source implementations of DNS these days. DNS name servers are openly promiscuous. They'll answer anyone. And sometimes that's a bug, but name servers will answer anyone, irrespective of who asked. The information itself in the DNS, openly available. There's some sort of qualification here that are almost a bit like a phone book. The individual entries are certainly there, but the collection might be not available. And certainly some zones don't do and allow zone walking. But, you know, if you do a query, you get an answer, anyone can do it. So the queries, the responses, even the protocol is open. You just look and you'll see answers, questions and answers, which, you know, in this day and age was about the worst possible thing we could have done. It's a massive problem because it's a weakness. Because now the DNS is the universal clue of the internet. It's not IP addresses, it's not connectivity, sorry about that. The actual underpinning of what defines the internet is the DNS. It is the namespace. And if I can see your queries in real time, I don't need to know anything more about you. I know you. I know what adware you're running. I know what you're doing. And interestingly, if I could jump into that conversation that you have with the DNS that your system is doing and make some services disappear, I could do that. If I could change responses, I could control it. This is an awfully big area of vulnerability. And in today's surveillance economy, and you know, that's what we live in terms of the capitalist, the surveillance capitalism, which is really what drives the internet these days. If I know the DNS, I know you. And if you took Google, if they bothered to look, the wealth of information they get, because literally about 1/3 of the world's users send their queries to Google, why bother doing anything else? You know it all if you looked at the answers. So let's unwrap this a little bit because this is starting to get slightly chilly. What does the DNS do? It just takes human use labels, you know, a string of words, sends them into the DNS system, and up problems a protocol address that you can then connect to. But what's in that system? What is sort of sitting inside that cloud? And interestingly, for an open protocol with open source, it is one of the most opaque systems we've ever built. You can't see. You don't know. Once a query goes into the DNS, it gets lost because when someone else asks something related to that query, what are the name servers for jefffavoritespizza.com? That's not me asking anymore. It's some kind of recursive resolver asking. And so the elements don't forward the original query. Recursively, that is go and do their own. So you can't tell how a query tracks through the DNS infrastructure. You can't probe it. You have no way of knowing where the answer came from. Is that a cache? Is that from an authoritative server? Who gave me that answer? Nobody knows. There might even be query chains in the DNS because it doesn't use any kind of query counter. There could be queries in the DNS that have been circling there for years. No one knows. And so what's the level of interdependency in the DNS? How many name servers get involved to support your name? No one knows. And it sort of leads to the observation that in terms of the modern miracles of our technological world, the DNS is up front and center as one of the most astonishing. The fact that it works at all, is amazing. The fact that it works at the speed and volume we've actually built for it is incredible. If we were sitting back in the early 1980s trying to design a DNS to handle the trillions of queries that it has to handle and the milliseconds of time tolerance, we'd all give up and go, sorry, you are joking. Can't do it. We've done it amazingly. But, you know, the DNS is more than that. The DNS is a whole lot more than that. Because when we use DNS as a term, we're talking about a whole bunch of things almost as substitutions for each other. You know, it is a namespace. Google.com, NANOG.org, and so on, a collection of word strings in a hierarchy. The hierarchy is actually important. It's actually a name registration framework. We've got a whole bunch of folks slaving away in the name industry to run registries and registrars and handle provisioning protocols and make sure the authoritative servers are loaded with the right information. And that's a business. You know, we all do this for money. It's a distributed database, if you think about it, where this large sort of mapping system is not like a dictionary in a single sort of artifact. It's smeared all over the internet, where little bits of information sit all over the place, and the DNS protocol itself wanders through that thread, resolving individual names. It's a protocol, query response. And interestingly, it's a signaling medium because the DNS is everywhere and supported everywhere. You can use that for good or bad. It's up to you. So this is an astonishingly complex system. And the next thing to actually ask is, who's in charge? And the answer is nobody. It's just a market. It's completely deregulated. So if we want to talk about how the DNS works, how open is it? It's really a question about markets and market signaling. Not a question about someone telling us what to do. Nobody's telling us what to do. The market is telling players what they should be doing. And there are a whole bunch of markets. It's not just one. Top-level labels, registrars, clients, resolvers, you know, this page has it all. I'm not going to spend the time listing it out, but you understand that there are a whole bunch of these markets. And maybe it's actually more than these markets. It's actually a set of needs. And so when we talk about the openness of the DNS, what we really are trying to understand is, do open markets work for the DNS? And to what extent are they failing? Now, the fact that you're getting names resolved here as I speak kind of attests to the fact that that's a stupid question. But maybe it's not. Maybe there are some quite deeper questions here, because if we are talking about the orchestration of a whole bunch of markets, we're actually talking about the internet itself, not just the DNS. And we can take the DNS as an example to sort of think about how the internet is evolving as a completely deregulated activity where no one and nothing is in charge. Now, if we want to talk about these themes of, you know, outcomes, there's control, privacy, trust, fragmentation, aggregation, centralization, abuse, you know, all of the typical topics of our times. But I always want to concentrate on a few because, you know, time is short and at some point we're going to lose interest. I'm sorry. So I'm just going to take a couple of these themes and actually look at where they're heading and why. And the first of these is actually the open market for trust, for credibility. Do you believe the DNS? Now, you might have a rather more jaundiced view of the DNS, but your browser doesn't, but your operating system doesn't. All of the elements of the machinery you use totally trusts the DNS. This is beyond credibility. It goes straight into credulity and slams right past it. Everything the DNS tells your machine believes. Should you believe it? Well, of course not. Of course not. You have no idea where the answer came from. As we've already said, it's open. Anyone can alter the answer. Yeah, we can do this better with digital cryptography. But, you know, do consumers prefer signed answers? Do they even have the ability to express a view? I only want to go to names or resources that are signed with DNSSEC. I don't want to go to any of these other untrustworthy names. Rubbish. You have no choice where your applications and services take you to. And so if that's the case, we haven't actually made a good job of this, have we? DNSSEC is certainly there, And we did an amazingly clever job in adding believability, credibility to DNS responses. Despite all the challenges, we managed to attach digital signatures to this data and actually allow the end user, if they so desired, to actually check that the answer they got was the answer that was originally published in the DNS. Wow, what an achievement. Now, you'd think that everyone wants it. I have a domain name. Of course I would like folk to trust the resolution of that name. Of course I would really not like someone else to intercede and send folk elsewhere when they were coming to my service. So of course I want trust. Users don't want to be misled. They really don't. And so it seems that everyone wants to use DNSSEC because it's in their interest. So everyone wants to use it. How much is out there? Well, if you live in the United States, you're kind of orange. Bad is red, good is green, you're not green. Saudi Arabia is green. Our friends Sweden and Finland are green. Australia is kind of orange. New Zealand is green. Yay, yay, New Zealand. And China is red. So all over the world, there's an awful lot of sort of disparity. And you might think that everyone wants to do this, but United Kingdom, no. Italy, no. Spain, no. They don't. Now, if you actually look at this and graph it, as I've been doing for way too long, around just under 30%, let's say a little over a quarter of users, sit behind validating DNSSEC resolvers. They won't take you to the bad place. On the other hand, 3/4 of the world's users don't seem to care. They don't check. Trust is kind of somebody else's problem, not mine. I don't care. Send me somewhere else. TLS saves everything. Puh, not. And so the issue is we don't do it. Now, part of the issue is the technology is hard, large responses. Technology takes time, and we're trying to make the whole internet faster, and DNSSEC is not faster, it's slower. And quite frankly, there's a whole bunch of issues that everyone goes, no, not going to do it. And of course, with the onset of quantum coming along at some point in the vague future, we're going to need bigger and bigger keys. So whatever the problems we have today with DNSSEC is going to be worse tomorrow. And last and not least, very, very few users actually validate. They trust their recursive resolver to do it for them. All of this work, and you still have that last mile going, nah, not a problem. It is a problem. And from this respect, there's a huge amount of effort in DNSSEC, a huge amount of effort. Gain? No one knows. Marginal at best. It's a market failure. Now, why? Well, I talked about markets and the way markets actually drive the internet. Users don't pay for the queries. So while I might have a preference for trust, I'm still going to pay the same amount for trusted answers as untrusted answers. Nothing. Nothing. And so I'm not paying. And secondly, I have no choice in what I query for. The names that my machine tries to resolve is really up to my machinery and up to folk who publish services, not the consumer. So I have no ability to express a preference for signed names. And so in some ways, cost and benefit are misaligned. Economic speak for market failure. No one's incented to do it. So trust, although everybody wants it, and we would all benefit from it, and it's being abused in every way and shape for more than a decade. Although trust is great, we can't seem to get to the room that has it. Because, quite frankly, if it wasn't for Google's public DNS service, there would be no DNSSEC out there whatsoever. And the fact that around 30% of the world's users actually use DNSSEC validating resolvers, and the fact that around 30% of the world's users send their queries to Google's public DNS is not a coincidence. So it's all there, what is there, because of Google and Google's Open DNS. So let's look at Google's Open DNS, because this is an open market. You can set up an Open DNS resolver. I can set up an Open DNS resolver. It's an open market. Anyone can do this. And this is another area where I've been measuring. So I measure the world's users every day. And I look to see whose DNS resolver do they use? And across the entire world, around 3/4 of the world's users simply do nothing, and their ISP resolves their name. Do you notice the weekend peaks? So in the enterprise world, they have a slight preference to use something else, but at home, whatever the ISP does. The next line is Google. Google has just around 30% of the world's users send their queries to Google. And although it's harder to discern, you can actually see enterprise folk have a higher preference for Google than the ISP. It tends to peak in weekdays, not weekends. Just under that, because of the artifact of where resolvers sit, around 20% of users send their queries to resolvers in a different network, but in the same country. And it's just likely to be internal to the ISP. All the rest of these open resolvers, it's just noise. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%, and that's it. So it's your ISP or Google. So if this is an open market, it's not very good. Google, 30%. Cloudflare, 4%. OpenDNS, 2%. Quad 9, 0.5%. And everything else is just your ISP. So it's a really good question. This is not the outcome of competition. This is the starting position. How did Google succeed and everyone else not if user share was the goal? If user share was the goal. And part of the effort is when I use the words name resolution economy, I'm kind of lying. It's a contradiction in terms. Clients don't pay for DNS resolution services. So, outside of your ISP, it's unfunded by me and you. And efforts to monetize, as we've talked before, like NX domain substitution, are generally frowned upon. We all get frowny-faced when folks substitute answers. Not a good idea. And so if I'm running an open resolver, I'm doing this as an act of charity. And the more people that use me, the more I need to spend money on machinery, money that no one's paying me. And so I'm heading into success disaster. The more successful the service, the more I have to find money, and the less I'm going to get users to give me money because they're not paying. Now, why does this work for Google and no one else? Well, the issue is Google isn't doing this because they're nice. They're doing this because Google is an advertising company. And what they're selling, advertising, is based on search. And so the major asset from Google is search. Now, it is trivially possible to use the DNS as a search engine. You just take all those NX domain answers and send them into a search engine going, you're trying to get to jeffsfavoritepizza.com. Tell you what, why don't you go to jeffsfavoritepizza.com.au, because I know better than you. We could do this, but if we did, it's Google that has the problem. And so it's in Google's interests to make sure that DNS is not a de facto search engine, to make sure that DNS does not become abused as a fuzzy search algorithm, a bit like search is meant to be. It's in Google's interest to keep search and the DNS widely separated. And so Google's spending money on a fast, accurate, incredibly efficient DNS service, but nevertheless honest. It's what's in the DNS, nothing special. That's Google's interest to do. And almost no one else has that special motivation. So let's see where this works, where it goes, the open market fragmentation. Because in the name resolution economy, everyone just uses the defaults. And for the ISP, they don't have an interest in making it better. Because when I pay my $10 a month, $100 a month, $1 zillion a month to my ISP, the quality of its DNS is not part of my decision. And so running a better DNS doesn't make my ISP more popular or less popular. Makes no difference to my choice as a consumer. So that means that the DNS for an ISP is cost, not revenue. And like any other cost element, increasing the costs of something where I don't get increased revenue is a bad thing, very bad. And so what this leads, oddly enough, is resistance to change. Because if folk don't care about a better DNS and a more up-to-date DNS, they don't make it better. They don't keep it up to date. They just run it as being functional, and that's it. And so an ISP doesn't have a huge department of the DNS. They often just outsource this because it's cost. They don't change their platform settings, nothing. Users don't bother either. They just tend to take the settings from their ISP, the defaults. And so in some ways, nobody has an interest in making things different. Now, if that means I want to change the DNS, I have this great new idea. The issue is, how do I get people to use it? How do I get ISPs to pay the cost of actually deploying this changed infrastructure? Platform providers to put it in their software. How do I get everyone to change? The answer is, well, that's normally a money problem. But if no one's paying money, it doesn't happen. And so while there's been a lot of talk about DNS over TLS, DNS over HTTPS, DNS over this, over that, the prospects don't look good. It looks like being a whole lot of effort in failure. But maybe not. Maybe not. Because what we're going to do instead is fragment the DNS and actually contemplate the unthinkable. Because quite frankly, this is a two-speed industry. If you work in the transmission, infrastructure, and ISP world, you're down in the utility commodity world, a bleak world of low margin, a bleak world of commoditized service, a bleak world that doesn't give you room to innovate, a world where your investment in existing infrastructure is so big, you cannot afford to change that infrastructure. Because if people aren't going to pay you any more money, you're just not going to do it. And so that sort of half of the one-speed world is running in very, very low gear. It's just commodity. It just wants to do what it did yesterday. But all the money is in applications and services these days. If you look at the top 10 companies in the world by market capitalization, they're all in the services area, be it Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Meta, and a bunch of others like that. They're all in the application space. And the folk who actually want to make changes and do really cool things to make their services better, faster, more responsive, more tailored, who want to change the DNS, are in the application world, not the ISP world. And so what we're going to do, and we have no choice, it's just going to happen, is the application space is going to hive the DNS off for itself and create application-specific services using DNS over HTTPS. Why not? If I can't change the existing infrastructure, tunnel through it. And if I really don't want anyone interfering with my tunnels, encrypt the tunnel. So there's sort of a generic observation here that's actually true for a whole bunch of infrastructure. We are now the incumbent, not the challenger. The sunk cost in infrastructure is now so great that we can't even contemplate changing it. The saga of the transition to V6 has been such a protracted saga, not because it's hard, not because we weren't aware, but because of the cost of changing everything was so high that it was hard to actually find that window of opportunity that said, right, everyone, let's spend the money and do it. And when you leave it to piecemeal, we simply spend all of our effort backhauling compatibility and just nothing happens. So the folk who want to move stop waiting for everyone else to move. They stop trying to fund everyone else to move. They stop trying to drag the ball and chain along with them. They just sever that chain and do what they want to do using whatever tools they can. And this is true of the DNS. It's true of a whole bunch of other areas of technology. The folk who have the money in the will just go and do it and use the existing infrastructure as little as possible. Tunnel through it with encrypted tunnels. All the money these days is in content. You know that, I know that. Applications drive the internet market. This is why we have content distribution networks driving the architecture of the internet. This is why no one cares about routing anymore. This is why transit is dead, because the network we're building now to make things bigger, to make things faster, in a world of abundant comms and abundant community, we just shift the content closer and closer to the user. It's cheaper. And so what we now do is actually draw in these services such as the DNS to tunnel through the existing legacy infrastructure and simply not pay anyone to upgrade. We just bypass them. And so what we're doing is effectively doing application-specific namespaces. And applications have really no interest in helping everyone else along. They have no interest in sustaining a single namespace or even single uniform protocol interoperability. They don't. They're not going to pay. So they're going to go their own way. And when we sort of contemplate this, the market forces that unleashed a whole bunch of players in a theoretically open market, unleashed a bunch of forces that caused that market to fragment in a very, very weird fashion, and actually into a world of application-centric services. It's still, I think, the internet, but it's awfully hard to tell with CDNs, with Anycast, because packets don't move around the world anymore from this client to that service. Users access services and the network infrastructure, CDNs and whatever, and including the DNS, get swept up into doing this in invisible and seamless ways. And so whatever you thought the internet was in 1980, 1990, the year 2000, you are wrong today. The entire internet is not a single unified coherent space anymore. It's a whole bunch of competing spaces. So is it open? Well, sort of. There are still niches and opportunities to play. The shop is not closed. The technologies are certainly there and available. But I think it's the failing days of this. It's the sunset of openness, because we can't keep it together, because the market forces that drive the internet are actually driving us towards specialization and fragmentation. And, this common benefit of a single cohesive internet, a single cohesive address space, a single cohesive transmission infrastructure that brings users to the service is about as dead as the concept of a single cohesive open namespace. But this is not unique. We were there before. We'll be there again. This is the tragedy of the commons unfolding before our very eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeff. This was very, very entertaining. Thank you.
Well, at least we can smile as the building falls down around us. Absolutely.
Absolutely. The least we can do, right?
Yep.
The one question I have is, which is Jeff's favorite pizza?
Napolitana every time.
Excellent. So I'm happy for once we didn't wake you up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is great. So
am I. Here I am.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you as well. Thank you for your 28th talk for the NANOG community. Thank you very much. So we have time for questions. I don't know if anybody in the room would like to go first while we are waiting for. Just state your name and affiliation.
Joshua Parrish with Santa Rosa Communications. So you kind of alluded at this, but do you think this fragmentation in the namespace could also happen in the numbering space?
I like the way you phrase that as a future possibility and not as a past historic fact. We broke the namespace with the first NAT and didn't realise it. But when V6 came along to try and restore a single, unified, cohesive address plane, where every connected device had a unique, globally unique IP address, we, as an industry, said, nah, don't need it. And here we are in 2022, and no one ever thought that IPv4 would be carrying a single packet. Yet, 2/3 of the world don't have IPv6. This is a fractured V4 internet where the address space is completely broken. I'm coming to you from network 10. So is most of the world. When I go to any car services, addresses just don't matter. They're just an ephemeral token to distinguish one conversation stream from another. And as soon as this stream stops, someone else is going to use my IP address. The whole idea that IP addresses make sense anymore as the Europeans would say, they're part of some personally identifiable information, is just such rabid tripe. It's just a denial of what addresses really are. We broke the addressing plan a long time ago, and we're okay with that. We're okay with that because these days, addresses aren't the thing. Clients don't need addresses, we don't care. Servers need names. And the only reason why I'm talking about the DNS is that the only thing left that defines this internet, as distinct from a bunch of others, is the namespace. The fact that when I talk about google.com and nanog.org, it means the same to you as it means to me. So if we break the namespace, the address space ain't going to help anyone. That's gone. And if you think you can deploy V6 globally and restore a networking technology that died in 1995 and build it again in the 2020s, good luck to you. You know, I will watch you quietly and bring some popcorn because it ain't going to work. So that world is over. Addresses are dead. And reviving Net 240 is not going to change that picture one iota. You know, get over it. We're nattered. It's over. And so all that's left is the namespace. And so your question, will addresses get us out of this hole? Of course they won't. And so the look of the DNS and what's going on there is actually fundamentally critical to everyone in that room and in my room too. The DNS is actually our network. And once you look at that and you look at what's happening, that's the point where we should all get worried. Because all those DNS resolver engines and CPEs, DNS mask and so on, with code written in, oh my God, 1995 and never been upgraded, it's never going to change. And so the frustration of folk like, well, Google, Facebook, Amazon, all those content folk that want to make the DNS faster, want to make it more capable, want to have SVCB records and so on, to turn the DNS into a phenomenally efficient rendezvous agent, look at the installed DNS infrastructure and go, oh my God, can't make it work. So what do we do instead? Tunnel through it, fracture it, build our own little area for our own little application space and say, well, now that I've got my own DNS, I can do all kinds of names. I can add application signal. I can go my own direction. And everyone's having that thought. And the end result is, you know, we broke it. Whoops. So yeah, address fragmentation is not in your future. It's deeply in your past.
Thank you. We have, Jeff, we have one question online. Bear with me because it's a bit long. So this is from Matt Pitak, underemployed, I love this. So his question is, won't having all the DNS for applications over to DNS over HTTPS end up solving the cost model for ISP resolvers, as the ISP resolvers will end up with a tiny cache of DNS over HTTPS endpoints to cache, rather than a huge array of real name to IP mappings? The volume of queries to ISP resolvers may be high, but the number of different name lookups becomes trivially small.
We're special. You know, here's this black box. And the last thing you should ever do, oh user of black boxes, is to change the settings. And so when we say that 30% of the world's users send their queries to Google, it is not because they wandered into the setting tabs and made some changes. They don't do that. The whole reason why Google has such market share is they've persuaded a whole bunch of internet service providers to simply put in a DNS resolver that consists of a one-line forwarder. Send all the queries to Google. So I get rid of my cost. I send queries to Google. So what? It's free. I've got rid of cost. Users get a really fast and accurate DNS service. Everyone wins. And so today's reality is that that's already what's going on. And yes, there is no earthly reason why an ISP should continue to run their own DNS other than nostalgia and a desire to burn some money down the back, which just sounds insane these days, because why bother? Now, the problem is, of course, that other folk want to get inside this act, and those other folk aren't different ISPs or open resolver servers. That's not the story. It's actually the application space. And the application space wants more functionality. And so you can either sit there in the IETF and add new service records and change this and change that. And you know, how long does it take to get an RFC out there these days? Well, if you're ultra lucky, 5 years. If you're standard, longer. How long does it take from idea to RFC to implementation? We don't live that long. So why bother? Why should I go down a standards track when I can just as easily use HTTPS? The application, particularly a browser, sends its queries to servers that have not only a DNS sort of database, but a whole bunch of names, signals, and parameters that help my application over at the client side do better. Now, that's a really long gap between the client and the data center. No, it's not. It's just down the road. The entire CDN industry and the way we do applications now is we're compressing the internet down to this last mile service. And we're using, oddly enough, the DNS and actually taking the technology, ripping apart the global functionality of the DNS and putting back inside that services and functions that we would find almost impossible in a big mothership DNS, but disgustingly easy in a lightweight sort of transaction protocol, which is the DNS today. So Matthew, yes, ISPs will happily walk away from cost, but they're not giving up a version of the DNS that they ran against a version of the DNS that Google's running. They're giving it up against application level fragmentation and signaling. And the end result of that is we are almost accurately reinventing that bizarre world of fractured bulletin boards and discrete networks of the 1980s. Whereas instead of bulletin board operators, we're talking application ecosystems, the Chrome ecosystem, the Mozilla ecosystem, the LinkedIn ecosystem, where each area, like Meta, wants to keep you locked in there and not let you out. And that's what we're building. Why? Because that's where the money is. And as I said earlier in this talk, no one's in charge. There's no master plan. It's just money. And if you look at where the money goes, the money is busy ripping apart what we've spent the last 20 years building because, you know, greed, you know, this is where more money is. And so in creating what we've done, we sowed the seeds of its own destruction. So great question, Matthew, thank you. But I'm not sure you like the answer.
He says, Safari BBS for the win.
You know, Apple have their own hooks in you, and I don't think Safari was a big part of that plan. But yes, Safari BBS is certainly part of it. Mozilla's gone there. Chrome has gone there in spades. You know, the Google ecosystem is scary. And you know, I'm just waiting for Facebook to say, I'm sick and tired of Chrome, in fact, all the browsers looking over my shoulder. You're going to run my app. Why? Because no one else gets to see what's going on. And I keep control of the user. So yay. This is, you know, I'm sure there's a department in Meta right now, and there has been for years, trying to build something along those lines.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We have 1 minute left. I don't know if anybody else has another question. Looks like
We're all
not.
doomed. You need beer. Go have some.
Yes, we need beer. Thank you very, very much, Jeff. That was great. Thank you, as always. Take care.